Alright guys, let's talk about the a9iii and why Tony's right on some of it and wrong on others, because he's crazy. Oh, and this is Max. Great cat. Anyway, we know what Sony's done and we know what they're probably going to do with this a9iii. My prediction is no battery grip that's built in, because Sony doesn't do that. They've never done it before, not even with their A-mount series. So, and let's face it, really it kind of makes sense, because this way you can have a smaller camera if you want, or add a grip and make it bigger if you want. And so my guess is it'll be the exact same bodies as the A7R4. It'll have the new CF Express that Sony's offering, the smaller one, type I think A card. And so that's actually pretty smart by them. I do think it will be 50 megapixels. I think that's where Tony's wrong, because he thinks that for some reason you have to go low with the megapixels with that. Sony's been doing that for the first two generations. There's no need. And they have to go above the R5, because the R5 is shooting 20 frames per second at 45 megapixels. So if Sony does, you know, a 45 megapixel camera, well, then they really aren't doing much different than the R5. So I see Sony going higher than that, just to prove a point that they can outprocess this camera. And so we'll see if that's actually the case, but that's what I'm thinking, because it actually makes sense in terms of how Sony does their thing. Like, they have to go above what other people have done, in my opinion. With that, in that sense, it makes sense that they would do that. It does make sense that they would have a better AVF than the R5, the same one that's in the A7S III, and the same menus. I'd be shocked if they don't have the same flip screen, because the R5 has a flip screen, and if they're touting this as a really good video camera, I think they need to. Regardless of vlogging, who cares about the vlogging part of it, but for the just being able to use it in terms of more video capabilities and things like that, I think it makes a lot of sense. And I do like it for portraits, for portrait mode. So those are some of the things, and I do think it will probably do at least 20 frames per second electronically. I'd like to see, and I think they need to do a higher mechanical frames per second than 10. But again, we'll see, because it's higher megapixels. We'll see if they stick with the same shutter mechanism that they have. One case that they won't be as good in than the R5 is stabilization in terms of the photography side. But with Sony's A7S III, they did some magical stuff that between digital and their whatever they're doing, that seem to make it really good. And so I actually think in terms of video, they're doing some very smart things. And so that could be an area where they actually excel over the R5, because the R5 is good in video stabilization, but I don't think that it's quite to the level of the digital stabilization that Sony put into the A7S III. So that'll be something that's very interesting to see as well. Obviously, if they're doing a 50 megapixel camera, they're doing to do 8K, so it's going to have to do 8K. You'll be able to grab still images from that too, I'm sure. The biggest thing that'll be interesting to see is the readout speed of this sensor, because the R5 is pretty good, but it's not stacked or anything. I don't know if the 50 megapixel sensor will be stacked or not. But I know from experience that the A9 and the A9 II lose a bit of dynamic range with the stack sensor. So depending on if they're willing to lose that, we'll see what happens there. They may be willing to do the trade-off for faster readout and better in terms of the banding and things like that you get a lot of times with using electronic shutter. I will say the R5 does a pretty good job with it. It's definitely not perfect. You can still get banding, of course, and at higher shutter speeds. But it is better than, say, things like, you know, your normal A7 III and things like that. I think it's definitely faster. So even with 45 megapixels. But we'll see what happens there. I think, to me, that's gonna be the biggest tell of this camera, is that readout speed on the sensor, to see how we do with the electronic shutter. Because you can claim 20 frames per second, or however many frames per second you want, but if you have distortion and all of it, and it's not usable, then it doesn't matter. You know, like I know a lot of cameras that have done that. Specifically, you know, some of the Panasonic ones that have claimed, you know, higher frames per second, but you get a lot of banding and things like that. That's something that, you know, the A9 can band, but it's way better than every other camera out there because of that stack design. So again, it'll be interesting to see if they have that. And another thing that the stack design represents is a higher cost. So if they're really saying that this camera could cost $4,500, it could be because of the stack sensor if they come out with that. But we'll see. Again, I don't know. Depends what they want to do. But I'm assuming we'll have the same battery, the same, pretty much everything in terms of design and layout as something like the A7S III, and I think that's fine. It's definitely a lot better than they used to be, and so again, interesting camera. I'm excited to see what they come out with, how it compares to the R5, because the R5 really is amazing. And one other thing I think that Sony has to come out with in this camera is a9iii AF for birds. If they don't, I'd be shocked. I think that's something that they'll probably come out with as a feature in this camera for the first time ever, because again, the R5 did it first, but can Sony improve upon it? Can Sony make it better? We'll find out. I think that's a big thing they need to have on that if they're going to compete with the R5, because a lot of people love that bird IAF feature, and it is pretty fantastic and amazing in a lot of situations. Is it perfect? No, but it does help in a lot of situations, and it makes wildlife photography a bit easier and easier to get into, especially with the 800 f11 lenses. Like you know, it's $900 for an 800 f11. Now it's f11, but it's with the high ISO capability, it's pretty amazing. So another, you know, that brings me to the other thing with the a9iii is, how will the low light be on it? Will it be up to 51,000 native like the R5? We'll see. I think it needs to be, and I think it needs to compete well in terms of the ISO in turn, because the R5 is really the best I've used in terms of full frame, high megapixel camera, and low light. It is the best I've ever seen, for sure. So, and I've had the A7R III, the A7R IV, I've used the Nikon D850, which I thought wasn't that awesome. Even the Panasonic, the Panasonic resolution camera, high resolution 47 megapixel, I didn't think was that awesome. It's not terrible, but again, it goes up to 50,000 max, so you're limited a bit. Again, I think this is the best in terms of low light, so we'll see what Sony does, because Sony is known for their sensors. And so that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below.